Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Berit Johannesson and I'll be your host today, and our presenter is going to be Jonathan Su. Today's topic is focused on community form building. So this is where you may have received some notifications, but John was urging people to submit forms and projects that they were working on so that he could then demo and show how to build those forms successfully during today's webinar. As we go on, it's important for all of you to stay up and know what's going on with Zerion software. So what John's done here is he's given four links that we think are really helpful to help you follow along and be aware of all the activity. So we point to Zerion blog. This has a couple articles actually every week, one of them being the Data Management Digest. Also, definitely join our community and see what's new and vote on some of these topics and see what's coming next to the platform. And the last two sections that we have here in the announcements, we have two other places that we post details or post blogs. One is for Zerion Engineering and the other is Zerion Customer Success Center. Again, we have articles going up in those probably once or twice a week as well. Before I go ahead and hand this over to John, I do want to get a good grasp of our audience today, so I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll, and this will just quickly ask if you're a current user. So all of you attending, if you go ahead and put your response in, that would be great. All right, so we're getting a lot of good responses here. I'll just give it another second in hopes that we can get some last-minute votes in. And I'll go ahead and close that poll and share. And John, those results are pretty good. We have a lot of people who are current iFormBuilder or Zerion Connect plans, but we also have a small group of people who are just checking things out and want to see what you have to offer. And then the last poll we're going to launch here is just finding out your level of experience with form building. All right, so we have a good amount of responses coming in. And it looks like we've got some brand new users all the way down to the forms, or people who've been building a good amount of forms and feel pretty comfortable with it. And at this point, I'm going to close the poll and hand it over to you, John.
Thanks, Barrett, and welcome everybody to the first webinar of 2018. I'm happy to be bringing webinars to you all again this year. We spent some time and tried to figure out ways to improve the engagement with our user base during these webinars. And so what we're going to be doing is actually having monthly form building webinars. I wanted to explain the format of the webinars as how they'll be in 2018. Now, this is only for this one series of webinars. We're also going to be doing special topic webinars throughout the year as well. But in terms of these training form building webinars, you're really going to be able to participate in them in 4 different ways. So the first thing is, what we're going to be trying to do is I want to get a little bit more discussion going on through the Zerion community, which can be found on our help desk. If we go back to this page here, it's actually the second link in the news and announcements. So if you've ever been on our Customer Success Center, also called our knowledge base, there's a link in the upper right corner to go to the community. Inside of there, I actually have a post. I can show this to you here. So this is our community. In the What's New section, there's going to be a pinned and featured post for this 2018 webinar series. And in here, I have some description about how to participate, but the main gist of this is that I'm asking people to do is to post down here, and if you have forms that you'd like to recommend or to submit for these webinars, I'm going to be pulling from a pool of forms that are submitted each month. And so if your form has a section that either you're having trouble building or you think would be good to share or has some solid fundamentals in it, I'll be taking that form and featuring it each month during these webinars. The next way you're going to be able to participate is just what you all are doing right now, which is to register for the monthly webinars and then to join and attend. I highly recommend you actually join the webinars because that's going to allow you to ask questions during the webinar. Hopefully you'll be able to follow along with some of the form building as well. I know in the first poll Barrett launched, there are a couple of people here who either have had their trial accounts expire or they're just here checking things out. Either way, I would recommend being able to have an access to a trial account so that you can open up your form builder and potentially follow along during this webinar. If the pace of the webinar is a little bit quick for you, you'll also be able to view the recordings afterwards and then follow along and build that way as well. Now, in addition to building during the webinars, you're going to be able to ask questions like Barrett went through in the GoToMeeting control panel. Additionally, also, if you have any questions after the webinar is completed, I would recommend posting those in the community as well, just as a comment in the thread, and we're going to be very active in checking that and being able to reply to you there. And finally, afterwards, after this webinar, if you have questions or you have more challenges that you want to talk to us on a one-on-one basis, feel free to reach out to us, whether it's going to be at sales@zerionsoftware.com. If you have some technical questions, you can reach out to our support. And then finally, if you have project considerations, you can reach out to us at solutions@zerionsoftware.com. And if you don't remember any of those email addresses, no worries. We always have our online chat, which you can jump on, and we'll be able to route you to where you need to go. So all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the content of today's webinar. What I want to show you all is the form that we're going to be building today. Now, because I only have 45 minutes for the webinar, we're not going to be able to build the entire form, and that's going to be pretty common during these webinars. But what I did was, after getting this form submitted to me, I looked for a section that I thought would have a lot of good fundamentals, best practices, and strategies to communicate to the audience. And so what I want to do is take this top portion of the form. Now, this is a form just to do a manhole inspection. The area that's boxed in red is what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, before we get started with the actual form building, I want to take some time and go through this form in its paper format and then make a couple of notes on what we're going to be doing. So the first thing is each of these fields in a paper form is traditionally going to have just that line under it, as you see here. Sometimes what you might have are sets of responses that you could either circle or you would somehow note which one you select. When you convert this paper form to a digital format, you're going to have a lot more variety and a lot more tools at your disposal. So what you're going to see is a lot of these will look slightly different. Some of the things I want to highlight, though, were fields like the surveyor, as well as the date, as well as the location. So these three fields I wanted to highlight in particular, and I'll talk through each one of them. The date is the first field. Now, depending on the workflow, and this is going to be specific to each different group, a lot of the times the date could have a default value. Perhaps you want to set the date's default to the current day as it is. Sometimes the dates are going to be more variable than that, though, and you may want to leave it blank. So I'm just going to say it up front, for this form, what we're going to be doing is using an element to capture date information, but we're not going to pre-populate it. We're going to leave it empty so that it gives the form builder, or not the form builder, the data collector, a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more guidance when they go through the form. The next piece here is the surveyor. Now, normally what you'd have to do is this form is a generic form. Every single data collector is going to have the same form and they have to write their name in. Because we're moving to a digital platform, you have an actual username and a password. You have login credentials. Using those credentials, we're able to pull that information onto the form. So in fact, you don't actually have to say who you are. That's already going to be hard-coded in the response of the record. That's going to improve your data integrity, and it's also going to speed up your data collection because it's one less field to fill in. And finally, this last field here, location, you'll notice that this is a really long area, and that's probably meant to be very generic in how you're going to capture that data. What we're going to be using in our form instead is leveraging the GPS capabilities of a mobile device to actually grab the latitude and longitude so that you have an exact GPS pinpoint for the location of where this inspection was conducted. All right, so now that I've gone through this form a little bit, let's go ahead and jump over to my browser. I'm going to close this community tab, and now I'm logged into my iFormBuilder control panel. What I'm going to do is under Forms, I'm going to go to Form Builder to open this up, and we're going to start by creating a new form in the upper right corner. Now what I'm going to do for the labels, I'm going to call this manhole inspection. Just like the title of the form already was, I'm going to put a date next to this as well. So today is the 13th. of 2018. Underneath the label, you'll notice there is a field called table name. This is going to be the actual name of the data table that's stored in the database. The label, on the other hand, is what you'll see on the device. And so this you want to be more human readable, and you'll notice that this is automatically made lowercase with underscores, and that's because we want this to be machine readable. It has to be what's called database friendly. I'm going to uncheck based on label to clean this up just a little bit. And then I'm going to scroll down and create my form. Now there's a lot of other configurations you can do at the beginning of creating a form. I'm not going to go through those today. If you have any questions about them, feel free to reach out and we'll be able to answer those later on. Now that I've created my form, I'm going to be inside of my form builder here, and there are three main sections. On the left-hand side, you're going to have all the different elements that you can add to a form. Now, an element is simply going to be a data collection point. Some of them are going to be for data capture, some of them are going to be for display and clarity of the form structure. But understand that a form is always built up of elements. In the middle, you're going to have what's called a device view. This is going to give you a list of all the elements that are on your device. Now, this is not an exact representation of how the form will look when you load it up on your mobile device, whether that be a phone or a tablet. In fact, I actually have my device here connected. Right now, you'll see it's empty. There are no forms loaded on it. But as we go through the form building, I'm going to be going through the process of saving, syncing, and then checking my results. And on the right-hand side here, we have all the different element properties that can be filled out. And again, these I'll be going through on an individual basis as we build the form out. So let's go ahead and start building now. The first thing I want to do is add a section for the surveyor. Now, because I don't want the surveyor to be modified based on who's been logged in, I'm going to use what's called a read-only element. This is an element that's going to display like a regular text element. However, you cannot change the actual value here. What I'm going to do is add my label text here, and I'm going to copy it as my data column name or my element's name. Now again, the label is what will be shown on the device. The data column name is what will be stored in the back end. I'm going to scroll down here real briefly, and under Smart Controls, which are going to be the mechanisms we use to have advanced form building features such as pre-filling values, showing and hiding elements, or doing calculations, we're going to use what's called a dynamic value. Now, if I hover over this tooltip, you'll see that a dynamic value is how you can set the value or the input of this element based on a formula. In this instance, what we want to do is use some of the iFormBuilder built-in functions, specifically the iFormBuilder built-in function for username. So what this is going to do is pre-populate my form with the username of who is logged in. And what we're going to do now is go up in the upper right corner, save this. I'm going to go back to my device and I'm going to sync it so we download the form and we'll take a look right away. Now, while this is happening, Barrett, I wanted to check in real quickly to see if there are any questions that have come up that I'd be able to answer.
Hey, we're okay now.
Okay. So let's go ahead and open up my form. And you'll see here I have my read-only element. If I tap the element to enter it, I cannot enter and modify it. And you'll also see that my username is what is shown inside of the element. So now that that's good, let's go ahead and add a few more fields. We're going to go ahead and add a date element to capture the inspection date. Now what I want to show you real quickly is a safety feature we have here in the form builder. Now if I try to call this element date, what's going to happen when I save is it's going to give me an error. You'll notice that by the red exclamation point as well as the outline here. The reason is because date is not actually allowed as a data column name, and that's because this word is reserved already. It's called a reserved word. There is a list of them here that you'll find if you follow that link. And basically what that means is that the word date by itself as a data column name already has a meaning, and so you can't use it as just a standalone data column name. So what I'm going to do is call this inspection date. Let me save one more time. And now let's add a few more elements so we can speed this up a little bit. I'm going to add a manhole number as a text element. And what I can do is also turn on based on label so that you'll notice the data column name matches the label, except it's database friendly. After this, let's add a certificate number. And then I'll click one more time to add a sheet number. From here, let's go ahead and save our form. I'm going to go back. I'm going to cancel out of this record by clicking the X in the upper left corner. I'm going to click on the sync button in the upper right, and we'll take a look at our changes. Now, this process I'm going through of doing a small bit of form building, saving, checking, and then going back to build some more is something I highly recommend as a best practice. A lot of the times you don't want to go through your forms realizing that you made a mistake, and then you have to go back and find where the mistake was later on. It makes troubleshooting and debugging a lot more difficult. Now let's go through and fill out this form just to see how everything works. If I click on inspection date, you'll see I get a radial dial to choose the date. Let's go ahead and make this for today. I'll select. For the manhole number, I'm able to enter in values here. Now, currently what's going to happen is because it's a text element, it's going to default to this keyboard. However, most likely the manhole number is going to be a numeric input. So what we're going to do is make a small modification to that, as well as the certificate number, as well as the sheet number. So we'll go ahead and change all of those. Now, if you're brand new to iFormBuilder, I do want to go through this process of how to finish a record, what we call completing a record, and then syncing it. So if I press done, you'll notice here I have one row, also called a record, with this hourglass icon, and that's going to show me that I have a record that's been marked as completed. You'll see it on the home screen here as well. And when I sync my device like I did last time, not only am I downloading data in terms of forms, I'm also going to be uploading data in terms of records. And so you'll see here, it's going to upload any record that's been marked as complete. So it says records uploaded 1, sync successful. And so now what that means is that record has been moved from my device to my cloud storage online where I can view it from the control panel. I can edit it if necessary. I can also assign it to another user for them to edit as well. All right, let's continue on building. So the first thing we're going to do is make some revisions to these fields. Now, manhole number, what we wanted to do was change the keyboard. Instead of having a default keyboard, we wanted to make this a number pad. We'll do that with certificate number as well as sheet number. Now, I'm making an assumption here that these are only going to be numeric inputs, but in the case where they're not, then we can leave the keyboard as it was previously. Now, something else I want to do is with the inspection date, I want to make sure that this is filled in. So I'm going to mark this as required. And you'll notice there's a red asterisk mark here. That's how you're going to be able to tell it's required. And you'll see the same thing on the form when we take a look in a bit. Now, after this, we're going to have the city. And then we're going to have the location. Now, for the location, as I said, instead of just typing in freehand where the location is, that can be very easily misleading. I want to point us and highlight our location element, which is actually going to use the mobile device's GPS to record that information. I'm going to call this GPS location. Again, I'm actually taking a bit of a shortcut here. The reason I call it this is because location by itself is a reserved word, just like date was. Let's go ahead and save this and take a look. I'm syncing my device now. We'll go back. We'll open up the form, and you'll see I have a blank form here. Inspection date. I'm going to select, and you'll notice there's an asterisk next to the label. For manhole number, you'll notice that I get my keypad now. With numbers, it's the same thing here. And then for the GPS location is what I want to show. You'll see that I can refresh, click on done, and it's going to capture those GPS coordinates for me. Let me go ahead and finish this up, and I'm going to go ahead and submit this record again, and we will keep on building. So the final two fields in the top section, if we go back here to take a look, we've done manhole number, date, surveyor, certificate sheet, city, and location. So now we've got to do household number and street address. For the household number, let's go ahead and use an actual text element one more time. And then we're going to call this house number. I'm going to clean up my label. And I'm again going to set this to, wrong drop down, my keyboard to a number pad. And then the last thing is going to be the street address. Now I do want to highlight, I'm not going to show it during this webinar just because of the time and because of the audience. We actually do offer the ability to integrate with certain APIs. Now this is going to require a connected environment as opposed to being offline. But we've done solutions in the past where from the GPS coordinates, we've actually pulled the street information. So things like city, street address wouldn't even need to be filled in, further automating and accelerating your data collection. Now, next, what I want to do is add a divider to this. My divider element isn't going to have any sort of an input. It's not going to be anything that is captured in terms of data. But what I'm doing is I'm using that to separate portions of my form. One of the advantages a paper form is going to have over a mobile platform is the fact that you can just look at the entire sheet of paper. It's spatially oriented. It's going to be a little bit easier to look at as a whole. Whereas on a mobile device, your screen's a little bit smaller. So what we do is we use dividers to separate sections of our forms so that it's still easily read. We've now finished this whole top section. We added our divider here, and we're going to do these last two elements, manhole use as well as purpose. Now you'll notice in this form, there are set options to be chosen: sanitary, storm, process, combined, force main, and other for this one data collection point, manhole use. This is a prime candidate for what's called an option list. An option list is going to be a predefined set of values that you then attach to an element to use. So what I mean by that is I'm going to create my list of 6 choices, and then I'm going to add an element with that list. And inside the form, you can only choose from those options. Now, this is going to be a really, really important aspect of good form design and the ability to collect good data. By predefining the responses that can be given, you're going to very dramatically increase the integrity of your data because you won't have to worry about cleaning it. You're not going to have to worry about converting values or getting responses that are not what you expect. So let's go ahead and build this out now. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to save this. And up here, you'll see there's a section for option lists. Now, what I'm going to do is right-click on this and open it in a new tab. One of the other recommendations I have in terms of setting up your workspace effectively is to use multiple tabs, whether it's for multiple forms or for the option list manager. That's going to allow you to jump back and forth a lot more quickly. I'm going to create a list just like I created a form before, and I'm going to give my option list a name. I'm going to call this manhole uses. And here what I'm going to be doing is adding in labels and key values for each of my options. Now the label is going to be the text that is shown on the device, similar to an elements label. The key value is going to be the input that is stored in the data table. Additionally, your key value has to be unique, so it's also the identifier for that option within the list. You'll notice the key value mimics the label similar to how the elements were behaving, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in. As I do this, Barrett, is there anything that's been asked that I could answer, or is everything going well?
John, everything's going really well. One question that I thought would help and benefit other people here was about choosing a keyboard. And how there may be times where you want to choose a keyboard that has alpha and numeric characters, and it may not be the default keyboard.
Sure, yeah, that's a really good question. And Honestly, the keyboard setting is going to be something that will require a small bit of trial and error. This is one because you'll want to make sure that the keyboard that's chosen has all the appropriate inputs that you'll need for that element. But additionally, depending on the device's size actually, and also the operating system, the keyboard could be slightly different. When I select a number pad here, you'll notice that it gave me like the full number keyboard with different symbols underneath. However, if you're actually on a phone as opposed to an iPad, which I'm using now, if I were to be using a phone, then it would give me just a number pad, almost like a phone dialing number pad. And so it's even less restrictive, or it's more restrictive. There's less options to be entered. So you'll want to do a little bit of trial and error with that and see what works best for you. Now, as I added in these options, you'll notice that the background is yellow. That's because I have not saved these options yet. I'm going to go up here and click on the save icon to save these changes. You'll notice the background turns white. Now I've defined this option list for manhole use. What I'm going to do while I'm inside of my option list manager is also define the options for this second field down here, purpose. So let's go ahead and create another option list. We'll call this manhole inspection purpose. Now the reason I'm being a little bit more descriptive with this name is because if I were to just call this option list purpose, that's not very descriptive, and understand that inside of my profile, there may be multiple option lists for multiple forms, and they're all going to be in the same area. And so I wanted to make sure that this option list is easily identified versus maybe another form I may make in the future that has a list of purposes as well. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in now. We have maintenance, I&I, post-rehab, pre-rehab, new, routine, cap, SSES, and other. Now I'm typing these out a little bit quickly. If you have longer option lists, like I'm talking about 20, 30, even in the hundreds, what I would recommend doing is actually setting up your option list as a CSV file. You'll notice up here there are up and down arrows. You can upload options as a CSV file, as well as take this option list here I have and download it as a CSV file as well. And that's going to give you the power of something like Excel or any sort of spreadsheeting software to modify the values as you need there, and then you can just upload them afterwards. So now that I've created those two option lists, let's go back to my form builder. Underneath this divider, we're going to add in the option-based element for manhole use. Now, I have three main option-based elements that I'm able to choose from. The first one being a select element, the second one being a pick list, and the third one being a multi-select. And I'm going to talk through these option-based elements and talk about the pros and cons of each one. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself when you're deciding which one to use is if you want to be able to choose more than one value from the option list. If the answer is yes, then you have to use a multi-select. It is the only element we offer where you can choose more than one value from an option list. Now, in this scenario, we don't want to do that, so we're going to move on down. The next option is a pick list. Now, a pick list and a select element are both used for single choices from the option list. The difference being a pick list is going to show as almost like a fly-out separate window where you're able to scroll through the options. You're also able to search, typing in a search string, and it will return the options that match your search string. Now, this is going to be great for going through longer lists because you're able to not only search, but you're able to scroll. On the other hand, a select is going to be used for shorter option lists that have maybe between 1 to 4 options. And a select is going to show inline in the screen. That's going to allow you to fill it out faster. But again, the trade-off or the limitation here is that you can't have as many options in your list. Because our option list has 6 values, I'm going to use a pick list. So I add this to my form. I'm going to set the label here as manhole use. I'm going to again check based on label. And on the right-hand side, under option lists, I'm going to click on this big green button where I'm able to choose the option list I want. And I'm going to find manhole uses. It's going to load it up here so I can take a look real quick, check to make sure everything is correct as I want it to be, and then I'm going to click on the sign selected. I'm going to do the same thing for my purpose, except that this time when I choose the option list, I'm going to choose the respective option list for this element. Let's go ahead and save and take a look at our form. You'll notice that it's downloading the option list. It was also downloading an updated version of the form. Now that it's been successful, I'm going to click OK, and we'll enter in our form. Now we've made a lot of changes since the last time I jumped over here to my iPad, so I want to go through this. The last thing we did, we looked at the GPS location, if we remember. I'm going to show us this one more time. We added in the house number and street address. Here's our divider. And then down here we have our manhole use and our purpose. When I enter into the manhole use, you'll notice that we get this separate window where I can scroll through and choose. If I choose storm, it's going to add a check mark next to it. If I click on another one, you'll notice I can only select one option. Same thing with purpose. You'll see there's a longer list. If I were to search here, you'll notice it's only going to return the options that match my search string. Okay, let me click on done. Whoops, here is my validation where the date is required. This is exactly why you want to have those things in your form so that you're not going to accidentally miss portions of your form's record. All right, this is uploading now. Record has been successfully synced. And I want us to go back to our form because we've got one more thing to build during today's webinar. Now you'll notice that both manhole purpose both purpose and manhole use have this option in our list for other. Now, if you filled out any paper forms, you've probably seen these sections where, if you choose other, there's going to be a text line underneath that they want you to fill out. What we're going to do is we're going to have the similar behavior, except we're going to take it to another level. In paper forms, that line always has to exist, so it's always possible to write it in, even when it shouldn't be filled in. On our mobile form, what we're going to be able to do is add the element to our form, but we're going to be able to control the visibility, so it's only going to show if other was chosen. So we're going to go back to our form builder, and we're going to implement this for manhole use first. Now what I want to do is use a text element. I'm going to set my label for manhole use, other. And down here, instead of doing a dynamic value, which we did earlier for the username, we're going to do a condition value. Now hovering over this tooltip, you'll notice the condition value says that it will display the element if the following condition is true. What that means is your condition value is going to be what's called an expression. An expression can either be true or it can be false. In the event the expression is true, the element will be shown. When the expression is false, so our condition value equals false, then the element will be hidden. So what we want to say is, if other was chosen from our list, then let's show this element. Now in order to do this match, what we're going to be doing is matching the key value. So if I go back to this option list, basically what I want to do is under key value, for other, I want to match this text here, lowercase o, other. Now you can do matches with the label as well as a sort order. However, I recommend against this. In fact, it's a best practice to use the key value. The reason being, your sort order could change very easily if you rearrange these options. We have a lot of groups where they want to keep their option lists alphabetical, and so they're constantly reorganizing and shuffling their option lists. In that scenario, if you were to match it to the numeric index, that could very easily be broken and then not show the correct one. As for the label text is mostly there for the benefit of the data collector. We've had groups receive a lot of feedback where initially the labels made sense to the form builder or to the admin or the project manager, but then the data collectors were not very clear on what the labels meant. So the labels can be changed pretty frequently as well. In addition to that, your label text can also be localized. So depending on which language you're using, you can have the label text be different. And so for those reasons, sort order and label are rather variable in terms of them changing. However, your key value tends to stay consistent. It has to be unique as well. It's the best candidate to do comparisons. Now, in order to access my key value, I'm going to use the special command ZC_display_key with an underscore. The next thing I need to do to finish off this command is to use the data column name from my pick list. And I actually noticed I have the wrong element selected, so I'm going to take this, cut it, and I'm going to paste it in my other. Now, as I said, I have to go back to my pick list, take the name of this element, and use it in my text element. So I'm going to take the key value from the option list in manhole use, and I want to compare it to see if it equals the string other. If other is equal to my selection, this would be true, meaning the element will be shown. Let's go ahead and save this and take a look to see how this functions. All right, we're going to open up our form, and we're going to go straight down to this bottom part, manhole use. If I choose process, nothing shows up underneath. If I choose other, then we have our text element show. Now we can even take this a step further. We could have this element be required. So if other was chosen, now this has to be filled out. So you're going to have a more complete data collection experience. You don't have to worry about somebody marking other and then not filling in this text field. Let's do the same thing for purpose. We're going to add our text element. We're going to call this purpose other. All right. And then we're going to go down here and set our condition value one more time. So special command, ZC_display_key underscore purpose, which is again the data column name of my pick list element. And we want to do a comparison to see if it equals the word other as our key value. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's refresh my device. I'll download the updated form. And let's take a look. So I'm going to fill out the whole form here. I'm going to start with my inspection date. We're going to do today. My manhole number, we're going to say 12345. Certificate number 23456. Sheet number 123. We'll be quick. For the city, I'm going to go ahead and type in Herndon, which is where we are located. GPS location, I will fill out. My house number, I'm just going to do 275. And the street address, 13650. Dulles Technology Drive. Okay. For manhole use, we're going to say process. For purpose, we're going to check here. We're going to do other. You'll see this shows up, and we're going to type in here test purpose webinar. We're going to click on done. We're going to sync our device, and we're going to upload that record. Now, in terms of viewing these records, I'm going to go back here real briefly to my control panel. If I click on the data tab, you'll notice this form is here, and we have 4 records. These were actually the records I submitted during the webinar. So if I were to click on the ID to pull up the data list view, you'll see these are the records that I filled out, and you're able to now, as an administrator, go in here and take a look at this data. You can also download it. There's a lot of different things you can do here. So to recap for today's webinar, I wanted to highlight the best practices and the strategies that we went through. The first thing is you always want to make sure you start off with a plan. Even if your form looks fairly straightforward, it's always a good exercise to go in and identify areas where you can use built-in functions, where you want to have different sections for your form. It just allows you to accelerate the data building process afterwards. My second strategy and recommended best practice is to find the element that fits best. And so what I mean by this is you want to find an element that's going to be restrictive enough that you can't enter in false values, but it's going to be open enough that you can enter in the full range of possible values. For example, in the city that we filled in, we did a free text form, and that could be okay, except that we could deal with misspellings, we could deal with capitalization inconsistencies. So potentially a better fit would be to use a pick list with a list of all the different cities that are possible to be selected. Again, similarly with the location, you're going to be getting very ambiguous data using a text element, but if we use the GPS coordinates, you now have exact data. That's going to be a better fit for you. Our third best practice is to emphasize option lists, and this actually touches on our second best practice about best fit. Anytime you can use an option-based element, I always consider that a win. I think that that's going to give you the highest level of data integrity and also a much faster data collection experience for your end users. Our fourth best practice here is to test your forms early and often. Now, I tested my form about 5 or 6 times during this webinar, and this was for a fairly straightforward form. Now, admittedly, if this wasn't a webinar, I probably wouldn't have checked my form that many times, but the point is you want to still do this in a repeated fashion. Form building is not the type of thing where you measure 5 times, cut once. A lot of the times there's going to be iterations to your forms. I know that when I've done form building projects, especially early on, by the time I finished my form, I had thought of different ways I could do the forms in a new fashion or different modifications I could make. So testing your forms early and often is always beneficial. In addition to that, I want to add that you should test your forms on all different types of devices you're planning on using. So if your end users are going to be on iOS as well as Android, test on both operating systems. And then finally, our last strategy here is to only show elements when necessary. Like we had with the other elements, you don't want to show those if they are not required fields based on what have been filled out. That's called skip logic is the term that we use as a broad defining vocabulary there. Inside of the form builder, the terminology is a condition value is what we use to control the visibility of an element. So if you're able to define rules like this, try to do that so the element is only shown when it is necessary to be shown. Barrett, we're getting towards the end of the webinar. I want to check in with you to see if there are any questions or if there are any comments or anything I could clear up.
Hi, John. There were a lot of great questions and comments coming in, and some are still coming in. One that I found was repeating was from your JavaScript statement where you actually had 3 equal signs. Because we have some folks who've been doing 2 equal signs, they were a bit concerned and confused with why you chose to have the 3.
Okay, that's a really good question, and I'll be completely honest with you, Barrett, and with the people in the audience. It's kind of confusing to explain the difference. What I'll say is for 99% of the use cases, the double equal sign and the triple equal sign work identically the same. For those of us on the broadcast who may be a little bit more technical, who maybe have a programming background, the triple equal sign is going to check the data type in addition to the value itself. So what that means effectively is that the number 9 is different than the text 9, even though it's the same symbol or the same character. The data type, numeric versus string, is going to play a role in the triple equal sign. It's called a strict equality operator, as opposed to just checking the regular equality. So if you want to make your form airtight, ironclad, then the triple equal sign is the way to go. Are there any other questions?
There were, but they've all been answered.
Okay, awesome. Well, everybody, I want to thank you for joining this first webinar of 2018. As I said earlier in the broadcast, please join on the discussion around this webinar in the community thread. Post questions there you have afterwards. If you have a form that you want me to build next month, go ahead and post it on there as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. The main thing is we're here for you guys, and I want to make sure that we're readily available and everyone knows how to get a hold of us. So Barrett, do you have any final words?
No, I just thank you for today's session. I know that the people who came in with questions really appreciated it. And I look forward to seeing more questions and people adding comments to the community as well.
Perfect. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next webinar.